So what was it that, like, at what point did you start, you went full time and you're like, I'm gonna do this for real?
So I started it in November of 2015, and at the time I was working for a tech startup in Philadelphia.
Hmm.
I lived in Philly at the time,
Okay.
and I like when I started it. So the first 8 people, like I took a picture with them, and I would just like brain dump notes into an Excel sheet.
Mm.
And then after I met 8 people, I was like, all right, I'm pretty like committed to it. I'm gonna see it through. And then I added, like, I started the Instagram account, and then I added everyone to that in January of 2016. And then from there just like kept doing it, and then I was laid off from my job because the company I worked for was bought out. So
Mm.
that was July of 2016, and it like we knew it was coming. Like our co-founders were pretty transparent with us, and so I knew that I was like becoming more and more interested in the project. And the
Hmm.
month leading up to me being laid off, um, my project had started getting press in the Philly area, like small like publications that no one outside of Philly would know, but that still was the first time that I felt press, and so it felt really like inspiring to me. And so
Yeah, like you're on
I,
the right path, right?
yeah, and I knew I
Yeah.
wanted to go into it full time. And my mindset at that time was like, I'll do it 2 to 3 months full time. If it's not going well, I'll go back into consulting, because I'd studied finance and did consulting for Deloitte straight out of school.
Okay.
And I was like, I'll just go back into consulting. But if it does go well, then I'll just continue doing it. So like I ultimately finished out my lease in Philly, which was 11 months from the time I was laid off. And then at that point, I had met 1,000 people, and I was like, all right, I'm just going to continue doing this. And my roommate from Penn State had invited me to go live with him in Los Angeles. And he was like, I have an extra bedroom for you. I can just host you, stay as long as you need to. So I
Wow.
went out with him for a summer, and then I moved back in with my parents that September. And like my buddy was getting married, and his bachelor party was on the East Coast, so I had to be back for that anyway. And then I just stayed through the holidays until the Eagles won the Super Bowl, and then I left the day after the Super Bowl parade. I went back to LA for 9 months, and then I went back with my parents for 4 months. Then I went back to LA for 3 months, and when I was there, my friends who live in Hoboken, New Jersey, were like, if you want
Hmm.
to come stay with us, like you can stay with us for a couple of months. So I went back to Philly last summer, and then I came up to Hoboken in August, and
Hmm.
I've been with them ever since. And I'm here for another like this week and then next week, and then I'm heading back to my parents again.
So like I'm thinking about the like beginning of starting traveling perspectives and like asking that first person and coming
Hmm.
up with the concept. So what, like, was there something that sparked the idea to start Rob's
I
10,000 Friends or?
Yeah, it was like a combination. Like when I went to school at Penn State, and
Mhm.
I knew a lot of people when I was a student there because I was involved in a lot of clubs and activities. So I had like this atmosphere where I was always running into people on the way to class or out at the bars and stuff. And
Mhm.
when I graduated, like it was a pretty stark contrast, because going into consulting, it was like me and a team of like 5 50-year-old dudes, and like
Yeah.
just like didn't have people who I could relate to. And so I missed that feeling of community, and I wanted to get back to being able to meet people without any agenda, because it was
Mhm.
like, I don't know, yeah, that. And like I had an instance one time when I had already thought of the project at this point, but and the other part was entrepreneurship. Like I minored in entrepreneurship, and so I always thought I could create my own path in life.
Mhm.
But like when I switched to the startup, I talked to one of my professors from Penn State, who he was one of my entrepreneurship professors, and I was like, hey, I just switched into like the startup world. If you know any resources from Penn State that I could talk to, like I'd like to hear about their experiences. And I talked to this one dude in California, and like I set up the call with him and told him that the professor introduced us. And like we got on the phone and we were talking, and like within like a minute he was like, what do you want, man? Like why are you on this phone? Like are you looking for a job? Like why
Mhm.
why why are you talking to me? And I was like, no, but I'm trying to like just connect, because I entered into like this startup world, and like I'm interested in what other people's experiences were. And like it just bothered me that he was so conditioned to be like, this guy has an agenda.
Right. Want
Like,
something from me. Yeah.
yeah. And so I was like, I'm just gonna find a way to meet people where there is no agenda.
Mm.
And through the project, like the project is the excuse, but it's like at the same time you're not talking for any particular reason other than to get to know each other.
Right.
And so that is kind of like how it started. Um, And like 10,000 to me was like the kicker that made it something that could be turned into a career as opposed to
Hmm.
just like a side project.
Right. Yeah. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Um, for me, like, so I had just graduated college when I started traveling perspectives, and I had my first job out of school. And what I was doing basically every Monday, I flew to a different city across the U.S. And then every Friday I flew home. So I was in airports every week, constantly flying around, and I got to be back home with my family for the weekend.
Hmm.
Um, but as a 23-year-old and like just out of school, you're kind of asking yourself those kinds of questions. That's like, is this even the right job for me right now? Am I making the right choices? Am I missing out on something else if I'm not taking other opportunities? And so I knew if I was asking myself these kinds of questions, then I knew that there were a bunch of people, around my same age who were also asking themselves that. And was always interested in like YouTube and social media and videography, photography, and being on the road, by yourself in hotels every week, and you try to find something to keep yourself busy. And not just laying around watching YouTube and Netflix. So
Hmm.
I wanted to work on like my editing skills and storytelling. So um, when I realized that every airport I went to was just full of people, I just I happened to be in airports all the time and with a lot of downtime. I figured it was kind of the perfect combination to start this project.